Okay, at the risk of completely dating this video, happy Easter, and thank you for everyone for their continued support and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, you know what to do. There'll be more of this nonsense coming again soon. So, Too Much Love Will Kill You was a bit of an interesting one. And when I was learning it yesterday, I found that I was agonising actually over the positions of each of the licks because I was trying to figure it out by ear. I always do that. I don't like to use tabs. And the reason why I want to do that is just that the reason why I actually learn any of these songs is just to try and better myself and to try and understand the music. And it's a good way of getting at it, is to actually just to literally slow the music down, try and break it apart and try and understand it and rebuild it, because that way you learn more, and we're always learning as musicians. This one sounded more straightforward than it turned out to be, and I'll show you why, because a lot of it is down to the intricacies and idiosyncratic nature of this particular guitar. I'll just go through it lick by lick and you'll see what I mean. So, ostensibly the song is in G major, it's over a nice sort of chord vamp. You know, nothing too scary. So the obvious place to start is good old G major pentatonic, and Brian May starts this with a sort of a compound bend. And what is he doing there? Well, he's bending the A note on the G string, he's anchoring the D on the B string, and he's bending that A into this shape, which if you have studied your cage, you know, your chord inversions, know that that's the third and the fifth of a G chord, which is the first chord that the keyboard plays. So basically he's just aping the keyboard in this particular lick. Now, because the guitar is tuned the way it is and laid out the way it is, I could have played that lick in a couple of places on the neck, and the most obvious place I could have played it would have been down here with the A bent up to B and the B string, and I'm catching here. Now, Brian May uses very light gauge strings. Up until recent years he was using 8 gauge, and personally I was using a minimum of 10 and often 11 for my own stuff and in other bands I was playing in. And the reason for that for me was that I wanted the high E string to respond tonally in the same way as the B string normally does, which is a lot more sustained, a lot more rounder. Now, people will argue that string thickness doesn't change tone. I think it does, and I think it does because it puts brakes on what your fretting hand is going to do. So higher gauges get you to play in a different way, and they respond in a different way. The strings probably sound the same, but if you use lighter strings, I think it does sound a little bit more jangulier because you're less likely to do certain things with it. And this guitar is set up with 9s. So if you actually play, and look, I mean, this is the same if I was using 11s, I suppose, too. If you play that lick here versus here, they actually sound quite different. I don't know if you can hear that, but the second one is a lot more bass heavy, it's a lot more growl to it, and if I was playing the amp up really loud, it would probably more inclined to respond with the pickups and generate a nice bit of crosstalk with the speaker and feedback. So that was the obvious first choice for that particular note, and if you listen to the original, I don't think anybody would disagree with me. But then as you go through the solo, it gets a little bit more controversial. So and then there's this bit. Now, this lick here could have been played here, I suppose. And it would be a lot easier to play it there than playing it where I played it in the tape. Now, why did I play it there? I thought that he had played it there. And it's simply because, I don't know if you can hear it. If I play that lick on the E string, there's a lot more of the higher harmonics in that sound. And I didn't hear that in the tape. And very often, when you actually see Brian's hands in a music video, you'll see impossibly ridiculous note choices up here and on the sort of the parts of the guitar where we try to only go to as a place of last resort, purely because it just sounds different. And the reason for that is that this is a very acoustically efficient guitar. It doesn't sound like a Les Paul in that way, and in Les Paul, it kind of does just kind of sound similar, particularly with 10 gauge or 11 gauge strings if you bend it here or if you bend it there. But in this guitar, it seems to be making a more profound difference because you're using a treble booster, you're not using a distortion pedal, there's still a lot of the actual acoustic sound of the guitar in the actual tone stream. So I think that's different anyway, and I chose to go up here. Now the consequences of going up here is that the rest of the lick has to be played up here. And I can do it that way. I choose to do it because it just fell under my fingers more naturally. And then, now, what I should have done after this, but I didn't do in the film, is to get that high E is hopped up a string. But I did it here. And that was just a decision I made in the moment. It was just easier for me to fly back here and grab that one. And it's a note that I trust because as guitarists, we play in A minor and E minor so often that bending that 15th fret of the B nearly becomes second nature to us. So it's nearly like a safe space in any solo, except for a lot of Queen solos when they're in flat keys, but generally it's a nice one. So just to show that lick again then for everybody that wants to learn it. And then use my second finger, supported by my first finger, I do the bend here. That lets me do some gratuitous, well, it's not gratuitous, necessary vibrato. And then, sorry. And you have a choice of bending this one, or, as I did. Now, the next lick, it can only really be played in two places, and one of them is just ridiculously hard. Now, two places. That's actually one of the highest notes on the guitar, but where else could I play it? Well, you could actually have done a pre-bend up here. And played it like that. And it's actually quite possible that he did do that because unlike someone doing a live performance to solo, Brian May could have dropped in. And what that means is that he could have played one lick, reset his hand, let the tape op run the tape again, and dropped in the next lick later. And that means that the issues of movement become less relevant. I think he did do that at one point. I'm not so sure if it was there or I think it might be the next lick, but I think there was a drop in, and that's fine. We all do things like that when we're recording, unless you're recording a video for YouTube. But in any case, the way I played it was here. And it was just a case of just being able to get there easier. So where else could we have played this? Well, just taking it from the top. And that's a good place to play it because the next lick can be played in two places as well. I'll show you where I played it. Now watch this one again. So we're bending here, catching the 15th fret on the B string. So it's a classic blues lick. Now what he does then is he goes backwards through the major scale. Like that, and it's actually quite fast. And then this is why this is a little bit ridiculous. So when you're bending one of the lower strings, it's good to pull down rather than pull up because you've more travel there, because you've more space to go down than you have to go up. So what I'm doing is bending 12, so it sounds like 14, or D, so it sounds like E. And I'm pulling off to B, and then sliding into the E at the end. Now, that lick happened so fast, it was actually very hard to figure it out, but those three notes seem to be definitely involved in it. Is there any other ways I could have done it? Yeah, absolutely. Could have done it like that, but I think I hear the slide, so that's why I chose that. Which would make sense as well, because I'm coming from... Oh, excuse me. So, could well have done that. I was probably making work for myself doing that, but again, I think I can hear a slide when you slow it down. Now, where else could I play that? I could have played this back here. But I really don't think it was there, because that would mean that because of the fret gap difference between the B string and the G string to execute the next one, I'd have to do something like, which just seems like a lot of travel area for something that can be done more concisely up here. Plus, it doesn't sound right. If you can hear the difference versus, you can hear that they do sound very much earthier down here because I'm using a wound string for the end of the lick, and I think you can hear that in the tape. So the rest of the solo is just more straightforward. So that's just bending 14 on the G, so it sounds like a B here again. And then our old friend bending D up to E here on the B string, 15 up to 17. And then all the way up here, and this is the only place without question that you can play this lick. So he's just bending the high D, or the 22nd fret of the E string, so it sounds like a high E. And when the song resolves back to a G chord, he plays a G note, which he could also have played. I wouldn't be precious of either. It just seems to make more sense to slide back to that one in the heat of the moment. So it just kind of shows you that, like, when you actually learn these songs, sometimes the instrument does dictate where you play some stuff. And there's another sort of famous example of that. Anyone that had to learn the fast solo and the longer version of I Want It All, there's a lot of hopping back and forth between 3 positions. That particular song is in B minor, so you have a B minor blues here, and you have another one here, and of course this one here, and it's using the full minor scale around there. But there's a couple of licks in that one, like there's a famous one where it starts, okay, so that's probably the best place to play that, but it's repeated an octave lower, and he does it up here. Now, the lick previous to that is in this space, so that's quite a leap. You know, it's a very large distance. It would have made sense for him to go. But there's a lot more work to use those 3 fingers as opposed to these 3. So sometimes making a large travel in terms of the neck makes sense, but it also might make sense tonally. Now, just going back to another topic that we started this with, which is tabs and why I don't use them. Queen are a band that have a lot of people that are just really super into Queen. It's a bit like the Beatles and U2 to the same degree. And what you often find is a lot of people that have to play their songs in cover bands, particularly keyboards, actually almost exclusively keyboardists, create a lot of MIDI files on their keyboards of how all the different parts are. And I don't know if anyone here has ever worked with MIDI files, but it's a very clever way of helping you to make backing tracks as well, particularly if they're good. Now, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to go in and tweak them, but there's some very good MIDI files of very famous songs out there, which are basically like music transcriptions that you can play. So if you have a DAW like Logic or Steinberg Cubase, you can actually see what the score looks like and read it and hear it at the same time, which is very good for your eye and ear training. But some of these guys, because they're not guitar players, they'll play the guitar solos on their keyboard. And the thing about the keyboard is where we have the discussion about, oh, we can play this here or this here, there's only one key on the keyboard that'll play that same note. So this idea of positions just doesn't exist in their world. And it's one of the reasons why traditional sheet music is very limiting for guitar, and actually a lot of stringed instruments, particularly fretted ones, are limited by it. Because you have to make that decision as to where you play a note that the stave can only reveal in one location, which is generally one key in the keyboard. So in the case of a lot of tabs, you see a lot of guys will take that MIDI file that a keyboard player created and they'll put it into software that converts it into tab, and the computer doesn't know about the struggles that we just discussed about the different locations for different notes. And very often it'll write the part without, considering, does it sound good in that particular position? Should it be played up higher? I mean, if you consider, like, I'll show you a more extreme example. This note here, E, could be played there, could be played with an open string, and they're all entirely different. So very often what you'll see is a lick in a lot of these power tabs will be written in the first position because the computer is just going for the lowest possible part of the neck to play it. So I did a cover of Millionaire Waltz recently, and it goes... And if you looked at a power tab for that, you would probably say... Which is correct technically, but it just doesn't sound right, because if you listen to the original, it sounds like a lot richer because the thicker girth of the tone of the string is involved. So these are all judgment calls. And what's easiest in terms of ergonomics might not be correct, because the original might have had the benefit of drop-ins, or just the choices were made because of how this thing was talking to an amplifier. So you're always going to make that judgment call. And the only way to settle it oftentimes is just to see if you can find a video of Brian playing it himself if you want to go for accuracy. But even sometimes you might find that Brian might change where he plays things too. And if you play in a Queen tribute band, you'll find you'll do the same, because you get to know the guitar, you get to know that certain notes are more prone to feedback than others and have a different ring, and you may make a decision on the fly. But that's all part of it, and that's what makes this an especially expressive instrument. Don't mean to be down people that play the keyboard. They're obviously awesome and great and the whole lot. But these things, they're alive, and it's like surfing sometimes playing them. So I'll have a look at how the tone was made next. I'm going to hop onto the computer for that. Okay, folks, so this is Logic Pro, and I use Logic just for recording these tracks and arranging all the parts. Now, just a general point, when I'm making the backing tracks, generally I make them myself. I don't like to use AI to put the real Queen in behind me. That's a lot of fun, by the way, and it's definitely something people should do. But because I'm a consummate nerd about the music of Queen, I like to make the tracks myself, and it's just so I can see where the guitar is sitting with things like the keyboards, the drums, and the bass. And I use a lot of IK Multimedia's plugins for that, and I'll probably do a video about that again, because it's kind of a nice process if you're willing to put the time into it. Anyway, we'll just talk about the guitar sounds today. And I've been obsessed with ToneX since it came out, and as I documented in another video and in other places on my personal internet space, I ran a project in January supported by a lot of good people from the Red Special forum group on Facebook, which incidentally, if you're into all of this type of stuff and the tone of Brian May, is not only just the sole reason to be a member of Facebook, but also the best place on the internet to get really considered and educated opinions about the sound and playing of Brian May. So if you're into that, Facebook, look for the group called the Red Special Forum Group, and it's the one that has like over 5,000 members. I think there's another group that has a similar name, but that's the one to join. It's very active, lots of friendly people there, excellent community, heartily recommend it. Anyway, I ran a project, and the project was to use IK Multimedia's ToneX capture software to go and literally try and get the innards of an ancient Vox AC30 and try and recreate it digitally. Now, I think it worked out fairly well. I have a couple of different profiles. If you go to tone.net, if you're using ToneX, just search for my name as one word, Thomas Brunkert, and you'll actually see a few, and some of them have treble boosters, and some of them don't, and some of them have cabs, and some of them don't. But we spent a lot of time just getting lots of different options. So it's a great place to start if you want to get Brian May's tone on tap. And the best thing about it is the ToneX app is free for the first 20 profiles that you download. So this is a great thing to try out, and it doesn't cost a whole lot to get going on it. You just need a computer or an iPhone or an iPad and an audio interface, and obviously hands and guitar. So in any case, one of the amps we captured was a Vox from 1971. And what I've done here is I've loaded this up in AmpliTube, and this is generally how I've been rolling with this software since I did those captures. And I've been kind of stuck on this one because it was actually kind of magical how it came out. And basically the way I use it, if you look up here, is you can use a cab that it was captured with. And this amp was so old that we didn't want to take it apart to capture it without the cab. But ToneX is so clever that it can kind of model the sound of the guitar amp without the cab. So you can actually knock off the cab it was captured with. It's not exactly the same as not having the cab, but it's close enough to make it work. Now, why would I do that? I like to be able to control the cab sounds using AmpliTube's cab set, because AmpliTube's cab set, I think they're quite good. There's some people that disagree with me on that, that's fine. I've had great results with them. I've been using them on stage now for nearly 2 years. I've been using a lot of these videos. They're great. And I think that it's a good way of just maintaining control of a profile is to actually use the virtual cab, because you know, a lot of the sound is baked in when you actually capture one of these guys, and there is an equalization on it. It's not quite the same as using amp equalization, which luckily for Brian May's tone is not really a thing, because the EQ is bypassed in the normal channel of the Vox when he's using them, and the only thing it's really doing is being pushed to within an inch of its life volume wise, and then hammered again with a treble booster. So EQ is not really important on the amp side, very important in terms of how you place mics. Now I'll just bring up this window here so you can see what's going on. In this particular case, I'm using a good old-fashioned 441 mic. Now I use 3 or 4 mics depending on how it sits in the mix. I'll use this one, sometimes I'll use the 421, sometimes I'll use it with this fella here, the SM57. So a 421 mic and an SM57, it's actually a fairly classic 70s, actually even to this day, mic combination, because the SM57 gets a lot of high-end clarity, whereas the 421 or 441 will pick up a lot of the thump of the cab, and the blend is quite complementary. Now, in this case, I just ran with the 1441 for no good reason other than I thought it sounded right. And when I played this tone, you probably noticed in the lesson part, it's actually fairly dull sounding on its own. It's not something that I play around with at home. And that's deliberate, because in the mix, we have a very watery sounding electric piano, and the guitar envelopes around that ballad like a warm blanket, essentially, sonically. And there was some additional effects put onto it to make it do that. Now, that's the next thing that I've done. As you can see here, I've taken the same amp sound and I've split it into 2 cabs. Now, this is to simulate something that you would do in a mixing desk, which is you might run the guitar into another effect using a send bus. Okay, now I just didn't want to do that. This is the same thing really. So basically what we've done here, because it's all digital, is we've copied the amp sound and we've just given it a slightly different cab configuration. So I put the mic somewhere else. I could have achieved this with EQ as well, but it was just, it was the way I chose to do it. And here's the key bit. Voila. Now don't mind that delay, it's off. This chorus, if you listen to it to help it sit with the keys, there was a production decision to put chorus onto the guitar signal after it had left the amp. Now, traditionally when Brian May is on stage, he does have chorus on his guitar in a wet dry configuration. So that means he's got 3 or in the 80s, 2 amps. One of them is just a normal guitar sound with the treble booster knocking the life out of that Vox AC30. And the other one is a chorus pedal in front of the amp. Now these days it's in front of 2 amps and it's in stereo. So it's actually 3 amps in total that are making his main guitar sound. Now in this case, I feel that this decision to use chorus was taken after the guitar was tracked, and it wasn't put across the whole of the guitar signal to my ears. Now, open to dispute and discussion and all of this nonsense, but I feel that it was used as a send effect. So I've recreated that idea here just by simply putting chorus on the output of one of the speaker cabs and blending it then in the mixer section in AmpliTube. So as you can see here, cab 1 is the dry amp and it's panned a little bit to the left. Cab 2 is the one with chorus, it's panned a little bit to the right. And they have slightly different levels of room sound and levels of overall volume level. So that's how it came out, and that came to me just by constant trying to get it to fit on the mix. And the caveat here is that this mightn't work over the original, because the original has a whole different set of sounds that my backing track doesn't have, and that's fine. But what you have to do when you're doing any of this stuff is you have to work with what you have. And if I had Brian May and Queen's backing track, I probably would have got something that was even closer again, because I necessarily need to have the guitar sit in that mix. Because I made my own track, I had to make those decisions myself, and that's where this is at. So just to finish up on this, I'm going to put that backing track on Facebook in the Red Special Forum group, so you can have a go yourself and you can try it out. I'm going to put this tone up on tone.net, so if you go to the AmpliTube side of tone.net and you search for Too Much Love Will Kill You, I'll have it up there. But here's the thing, this tone will not work unless you have ToneX installed and you've installed the 1971 Vox capture that I have posted. And just another little caveat on that, I use a real treble booster into the interface to get these sounds. If you don't have one of those, I have a capture of this amp with a treble booster in the front of it, and that can work as well. But because you can't share an AmpliTube preset with the ToneX model baked into it, the order play here is install ToneX, install the amp from my collection on tone.net. So that's either the one with a treble booster or without a treble booster if you happen to have a real one. And then install the AmpliTube preset. And 9 times out of 10, when you open up the AmpliTube preset, it's able to find the ToneX model and load automatically. If it doesn't, you might have to do it yourself. It's no big deal. There's nothing really complex here. Anyway, I'll progress down the chain. So there's a couple of things that I do here that I actually do with all of my guitar tracks, and they all have the benefit of this. They all will have the rack EQ and the EQ81, and they both do kind of the same thing, as a matter of fact, just they do it slightly differently. I'm actually going to start with EQ81, and I've talked about this before in some of my other videos, but this is more than just a simple equalizer. It's chasing after the sound of an old Neve desk, and the preamps in those desks are legendary. They are very famous because they add a lot of emphasis on the harmonics. So it's not just a case that they straight line boost the level of a microphone that's fed into it. They're able to find the musical qualities of that sound and just bring it more to the fore. So I'll just show you what it does actually. So I'm just going to knock it off. So this is the guitar tone without it. And then this is with it. Now I've applied some tweaks to it. But if you're using AmpliTube, just try this fella out and try it without tweaking the EQ on it, and you'll find that it just gives a lot more richness to the sound and expands out the sort of the frequencies that you want to hear. So what have I done to it? So on the EQ81 side, I have this pot set to 56 kilohertz. The biggest enemy of the guitar tone, believe it or not, is in the sub and in the bass. When you're trying to mix a guitar and it sounds woolly and mud, it's probably because you're letting too much of the bass into it. So you could have a discussion about this, but my feeling is that anything under 80 hertz in a guitar signal is going to cause you trouble, because it's going to run against some of the keyboard sounds, it's going to run against the bass guitar, it's going to run against a lot of the drum kit. And if you consider your mixes like a pipe, because there's only so much you can fit down it without it becoming nonsensical, the first thing that you should excise off a guitar signal is bass. I'm actually going to switch over to the graphic EQ, which everybody should have if they have AmpliTube. And you can see straight away in the low section that I've started to swoop down and remove a lot of the bass just below 100 hertz. Now 100 itself is kind of a useful frequency depending on your mix, but 80, start to get rid of it. Now to be honest, 63, this is a very extreme cut, it's at -7. Now I don't flatten everything. I find that you do need some of it sometimes, particularly with this track, because again, the aim of the mix was to try and create a lovely warm woolly blanket of sound. But in the main, if it's under 80 hertz, probably don't want it, so it's been cut out. And I've replicated that a bit more here because when I've set up this graphic EQ, I don't like to tweak it because it's a bit fiddly, and I still found that there was still too much sub in it, so I actually reduced it on the EQ81. Now I'm just going to go over to the rack graphic EQ for a second and look at the mid. Not a whole lot to be done here, and I just made a decision to put a slight boost in and around 1K, and it could have been me being a bit of a ninny, but I found that it did help settle the song in the mix, and there's not a whole lot else going on there. I mean, a lot of these sort of tweaks are just sort of me messing and not setting it back to 0 again. On the high end, however, as much as the low end can cause problems in your mix, the high end of a guitar can cause problems too. Now, I'm a bit more generous with the high end here because I find that the model cabs of the AC30 are quite good at removing a lot at the very high end, and there's not a lot of noise off this particular sound. Generally, if you're amplifying the signal of a guitar over 10K, what really lives there is not guitar anymore. It's mainly hiss and echoes of reverberations and things that are just really have no business being in your mix. I find with the Primate thing, you don't need to cut as much of that out as possible, but just as a standard maneuver, I tend to cut out the very high end out of it just to help manage any noise that might sneak into the mix, because it's not always useful. If it serves no role in the music, it's robbing tone from something else, so it has to go. Moving back to EQ81 now, and again, I made a little tweak here at this frequency because I just found that the sound was a little bit woofy, nothing major. Now, this is flash. Now, just to go against what I said earlier, I find that when you use the EQ81, that the 10K band is the best way of managing a lot of that upper register of fizz and space, because it's quite tight. So what I mean by that is that if you were moving this, it's like moving this fader here on its own. It's a lot easier for me to see. So I decided to introduce a little bit more air in the mix because I found it was a little bit too dull, and that's really it. That's the decision there. So moving along now, there's 2 delay blocks here. That's just a hangover from when I sometimes do the good old Brighton rock trick. Always keep it handy, so it's always in the chain just in case. But this delay here, and I'll just let you hear it, it's just a very slight atmospheric delay. Brian doesn't always use reverb. He very often uses the sound of the room, but sometimes he does use reverb. But again, it's kind of the rare occasion. I think the most obvious use of reverb would be the parts in Leaving Home Ain't Easy, where he's doing some harmony parts, and they're designed to sound a little bit more further away from the rest of the band. And I think in Who Wants to Live Forever, obviously, because that thing sounds like it was recorded in a massive valley in Scotland somewhere. But generally, when he wants to add atmosphere to the song, it's the sound of the room mics around the amp, or just simply delay. And this song has a good bit of delay to help it, again, settle into the mix. There's delay on the keyboard, and there's certainly delay on some of the drum parts. And that all helps build a sort of a nice sort of floaty atmosphere that the vocals just sit in against rather lovely. Now, the way I have this set up, I always, and like, listen, there's no excuse for this, always use the clock of the song to set the tempo of the delay. So in this case, it's an 8-note delay, but in the case of the song, the tempo and Logic made this lock in with the beat. So the delays are always in time with the music. I don't think there's any exception to that unless you want to deliberately make your song sound a little bit weird and jarring. Delays really should be in time with the beat of the song. In terms of the actual delay, it's just a straight stereo delay. So that's where it says LR up here, and LR left, right. So it just, again, when you hit the note, you'll get 2 repeats. Now the feedback, I've set it very low, so I only really wanted to hear the 2 repeats. And again, if you listen to those repeats, they're quite dull because the filter control is set to here. And what the filter control is doing is it removes top end off the sound of the repeats. Now, if you leave that fully open, the repeats sound nearly identical to the main guitar, which again is something you might want in some things, but I find in creating atmosphere, it just makes the guitar sound very distracting because the repeats start to take over a little bit from the main line, which you may want in other contexts. But in this case, we're creating ambience, so I hopped a lot at the top end off the repeats. Just the mix is set very low. The level control isn't changed at all because I don't want the delays to increase the level of the overall sound that I've created around here. So that's how I put it together. A bit of a long way of explaining it because you can just simply download this and use it. But the reason why I take the time to explain is some people do want to know, because they're always asking me on Instagram and Facebook and other channels how I came up with the sound. So now you know. And I hope somebody takes some of this and makes their own sounds. And if you do, please let me know. So listen, thank you for watching. This has been a very long, waffly video, and anyone that made it this far is some sort of legend. Have a great Easter if you're watching this around Easter time. And look, we'll make another video soon and we'll talk again then.